In the summer of 1981, the then Chinese president Deng Xiaoping brought a resolution titled The Resolution of Historical Questions Within the Chinese Communist Party since 1949. It was odd at that time because China was going through a very tumultuous phase. Mao had died just a few years before that. There was the famous Gang of Four trial that happened, and China was at a crossroads, not knowing whether to go the capitalist way or to continue to age-old socialism. And it's to Deng's credit that China opened up and reformed, and the modern-day Chinese miracle as we know it has been the result of that plenum that happened in 1981. It was the 11th Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, the 6th plenum. It was only the first time in the history of China that someone had brought a resolution on a historical question. Never before in the history of the modern-day People's Republic had somebody brought a resolution questioning something that happened in history. The only previous time was in 1945 when the legendary Mao Zedong himself brought in a resolution on the question of reviewing history. The third time it's happening is now in 2021, 40 years after Deng Xiaoping's famous resolution. The 19th Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party, its 6th plenum. The 6th plenum is very important. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party, the Central Committee is the highest decision-making body. It has about 350 plus members. They all meet 7 times over 5 years. The first 2 times, it's generally about ideological questions or party-related matters. The next 2 times, it's about governance issues. The 6th one is most important because it decides on the question of leadership. And every 10 years, the leadership changes in China. Certainly since Deng Xiaoping, there are constitutional mandates in China that the president can only have a 2-term limit. So you can be president for 10 years. But that has now changed with Xi Jinping. A few years ago, in 2018, Xi Jinping at the National People's Congress, which is the Chinese equivalent of its parliament, they changed the Chinese constitution, abolishing the 2-term limit. So thereby enabling Xi Jinping to get a 3rd term, something that no other president before him and after Mao has seen in China. So Deng Xiaoping never got a 3rd term, Hu Jintao never got a 3rd term, Jiang Zemin never got a 3rd term. Xi becomes the first leader in 3 generations to get a 3rd term. And this plenum, the 6th plenum, paves the way for that 3rd term, which will begin in November of 2022. Now, here's the interesting thing. Xi Jinping's resolution, it's called the Resolution of the CCP Central Committee on Major Achievements and Historical Experience of the Party's Century of Struggle. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party finished 100 years of existence in 2021. There were gala celebrations back in July, despite the fact at the height of coronavirus in China, there were gala celebrations marking the 100th year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. This particular resolution, unlike the one brought by Deng, which criticized both the Great Leap Forward as well as the Cultural Revolution, and also Mao's resolution back in 1945, which was used to try and get back at rivals within the party, Xi Jinping's resolution does not refer to either rivals because he does not have any now. He is in a supremely powerful position as far as the Chinese plethora of political matrix is concerned. And at the same time, it neither resolves any historical question. All that it does is to embodify something that he has called common prosperity. Remember, for the last 40 years, China has had effectively a capitalist system, but with socialistic characteristics. So the Chinese famously call it capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Because remember, reform and opening up, whether it is the factories, whether it is the big infrastructure push, all that we have seen as part of the great China miracle story over the last 40 years has been because of the embrace of market forces, because of the embrace of capitalism, even though Chinese Communist Party leaders will not admit in as many words. But now, over the last 4 or 5 years, and in particular in the last 1 year, what has happened is traditional symbols of capitalist success, whether it is startup companies, whether it is fintech companies. And China has had a huge string of first-generation entrepreneurs who've gone on to make big money, who've gone on to change the face of how business is carried out in China, whether it's a Jack Ma of Alibaba, whether it's the founders of Tencent, the founder of Didi. All of these multi-billionaires, first-generation entrepreneurs, there's been some form of purge against them in the last 1 year. All of this has ostensibly been done under Xi Jinping's famous theory of common prosperity, meaning China's development must benefit everyone, not just a few billionaires. So it's a bit of the equivalent of the 1% movement that we're seeing in China. Common prosperity has now become the guiding principle as far as China is concerned, certainly for the next decade, certainly for the third term of Xi Jinping. What else is expected to happen over the next decade or so? Remember, Xi Jinping, by changing the constitution, by getting a third term, and now by edifying himself as a core leader of the CCP, becomes the most powerful leader that China has seen since the great Mao Zedong. No one has seen this kind of power. Remember, Xi Jinping Thought, which is a collection of his speeches, policy announcements, etc., are now being taught in Chinese schools as part of history lessons. No one else has got this kind of exalted setting since Mao and Deng. So clearly, Xi Jinping finds himself in a very exalted position in the pantheon of China's leaders, certainly within the Chinese Communist Party. What may he do in his third term in a way that cements his place in history? He has said this before, numerous Chinese Communist Party leaders have said this before, that the one unfinished business as far as the Chinese Communist Party is concerned is the reunification of Taiwan. Remember, Taiwan effectively split from China at the end of the Second World War in 1945, and it got formalized in 1949 with the formation of the People's Republic of China, and then there was what is called the Republic of China, which is now modern-day Taiwan. Xi Jinping has publicly said his stated intention is the reunification of Taiwan by any means available, and many are saying the timeline that he has set for himself is before the end of this decade. So his third term could be defined by this singular question: what does it take to reunify Taiwan with China? The problem is, more than 95% of Taiwanese people do not want to reunify with China. So ultimately, this question will have to be resolved militarily. And when it comes to a military resolution of the Taiwan question, then inevitably the United States will have to come in, because the US is treaty-bound to defend Taiwan. Remember, just a few weeks back, the Taiwanese president, Tsai Ing-wen, had said in an interview to CNN, for the very first time, admitted that there were US troops on Taiwanese soil. So if there were to be some kind of a military conflict between China and Taiwan, the US will have to be inevitably drawn into it. Not more so because just recently, President Joe Biden of the United States completely put to rest this whole strategic ambiguity theory, which was what the US was following all these years as far as Taiwan is concerned. He said, we don't have time or space anymore for strategic ambiguity. So all the more reason why the US will be drawn in to a military conflict between China and Taiwan if one were to ever happen. So the way Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party sees it, this is the one unfinished business from Mao's time. Remember, Mao founded China in 1949. It was essentially his fight between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek, who were leading two parallel armies, which eventually led to the split between the PRC and the ROC, which is now the modern-day Taiwan. So Xi Jinping and this current generation, the fifth generation of CCP leaders, see the reunification of Taiwan as the one unfinished business from Mao's era. And that's why this third term and the time between 2022, when Xi Jinping officially gets that third term, and the next 10 years till the end of the decade is going to be a critical one to decide the future of not just Taipei and Beijing and cross-strait relations, but also, as a consequence, it will have huge implications for the region and beyond.